Billionaire Dad saw the young cook crying in the locker room, and what he did the next day shocked everyone. The wall clock read exactly 8 o'clock at night when Calvin Marks closed his laptop. His blue eyes, always attentive to the smallest details, scanned the impeccably organized office. Everything was in its proper place, the books aligned by height on the dark oak shelves, the pens arranged in parallel on the marble desk, and even the curtains hung in perfectly symmetrical folds. Calvin adjusted his wristwatch, a limited edition Patek Philippe that cost more than many houses, and frowned. 8 o'clock, dinner time. A routine he had followed religiously for 15 years, ever since he had transformed his small startup into a tech empire, valued in the billions, except that today, something was wrong. No sound of footsteps in the hallway, no gentle aroma of food being served in the main dining room, no Morton, his butler, knocking discreetly on the door to announce that the meal was ready. Calvin waited another 2 minutes, watching the clock hands with growing irritation. Punctuality wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity, a fundamental pillar in the meticulously constructed structure of his life. Unacceptable, he muttered to himself, rising from the Italian leather chair. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors of the mansion as he walked toward the kitchen. 50,000 square feet of luxury, and yet an emptiness that no amount of money seemed able to fill. The walls displayed priceless works of art that Calvin barely noticed anymore. Rare sculptures that had become just more objects on the path between one room and another. Calvin rarely appeared in the staff area. The space was different from the rest of the house, simpler, more functional, more human. He could hear whispered voices as he approached the main kitchen. "I don't know what to do," someone was saying in a muffled tone. Calvin entered the large modern room. Morton was there, along with 2 other employees, all with worried expressions. "Where is my dinner?" Calvin asked, his voice calm, but with a firmness that made his executives tremble in board meetings. Morton straightened up immediately. "Mr. Marks, I sincerely apologize for the delay. We had an unforeseen issue with Mrs. Lane." "Unforeseen issue? Aubrey, our chef, is having a difficult time, sir." Calvin raised an eyebrow. Aubrey Lane, the young chef he had hired about 6 months ago after his former cook retired. He vaguely remembered the interview, a young blonde woman with light-colored eyes in her early 20s, with an impressive resume for someone so young. Her meals were flawless, creative without being extravagant. Until today. "Where is she?" "In the staff locker room, sir. But perhaps it would be best to leave her." Calvin was already crossing the kitchen before Morton could finish his sentence. It wasn't just the delayed dinner that bothered him, it was the break in order. The interruption in the perfect flow that kept his life under control. The staff locker room was at the end of a narrow hallway. The door was ajar, and Calvin could hear muffled sobs coming from inside. He hesitated for a moment. Other people's emotions were not his territory. Numbers, strategies, acquisitions, those were his areas of expertise. Tears were complicated, unpredictable, disorderly. He pushed the door open anyway. Aubrey was sitting on a wooden bench, her back hunched, her face in her hands. Her immaculate white uniform contrasted with her emotional state. Her blonde hair, normally tied in a neat bun, fell loosely over her shoulders, forming a golden curtain that couldn't completely hide her red, tear-streaked face. She didn't notice his presence at first. Calvin stood in the doorway, uncomfortable, watching her. There was something strangely intimate about witnessing another person's pain, as if he were witnessing something he had no permission to see. When Aubrey finally looked up and saw him, her pale face grew even paler. She stood up quickly, wiping her tears with trembling hands. "Mr. Marks, I'm sorry, I didn't..." She tried to compose herself, fixing her disheveled hair. "Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes, I promise." Calvin remained still, watching her. There was something unusually vulnerable in the scene, something that contrasted deeply with the perfectly choreographed interactions he usually had with his staff. "Why are you crying?" The question came out more direct than he intended. Aubrey bit her lower lip, visibly struggling to hold back a new wave of tears. "My mother is sick." Her eyes, alight, brilliant sea green from the tears, met his for a brief moment before shifting to the floor. "Please, don't fire me." Calvin frowned. "Why would I fire you for that?" "Because—" She took a deep breath, trying to control her voice. "Because I've been missing Fridays to take her to the hospital. I've been leaving meals prepared, but I know it's not the same. And today I got a call while preparing dinner. She's gotten worse, and—" The words seemed stuck in her throat. Calvin watched her hands, small as with long, slender fingers, hands made for culinary precision, wringing nervously. What's her name?" he asked, not quite sure why it mattered. Marjorie Lane." The world around Calvin seemed to freeze in that instant. The name pierced his mind like an arrow, hitting a deep place he believed had been sealed off long ago. Marjorie Lane. The images came in flashes. A woman with a gentle smile, soft hands stroking his hair, the smell of cinnamon and vanilla, a soft voice singing quietly while he pretended to sleep. "Your mother," Calvin began, but the words died in his mouth. His normally composed expression revealed, for a split second, something Aubrey couldn't decipher. "Do you know her?" Aubrey's eyes widened slightly. Calvin remained silent for a few seconds, which seemed to stretch for an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual firmness. "Marjorie Lane. She took care of me when I was a child." It was Aubrey's turn to look shocked. "My mother worked for your family?" Calvin didn't answer directly. A whirlwind of long-suppressed memories now fought to surface in his consciousness. Memories of a time before money, before power, before he became Calvin Marks, the billionaire. Memories of when he was just Calvin, a boy starved for affection. "Where is she now?" he asked abruptly. "At home. We can't afford proper treatment or a full-time nurse." Aubrey looked down, shame coloring her already red cheeks. "I'm doing what I can, but—" Calvin straightened his shoulders, resuming his usual posture. His eyes, however, remained different. There was something in them that Aubrey couldn't identify. It wasn't the usual coldness. "Finish dinner," he said in a neutral tone, "and then we need to talk." He turned to leave but stopped with his hand on the doorknob. Without looking back, he added, "Your job is not at risk, Ms. Lane. Don't worry about that right now." Calvin closed the door softly behind him and stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to process what he had just discovered. The coincidence was almost unbelievable, or perhaps it wasn't a coincidence at all. Marjorie Lane. The name echoed in his mind like a long-forgotten melody that, once remembered, seemed impossible to ignore again. As he walked back to his office, Calvin felt something shifting inside him, like a stone being removed from a place where it had been firmly wedged for decades. The meticulously organized world he had built was beginning, almost imperceptibly, to shift its axis. Dinner could wait. Some matters, Calvin realized, were more important than routine. Calvin dined alone that night, as he always did. The meal was perfect, a wild mushroom risotto prepared exactly as he liked it. Aubrey had recovered enough to finish cooking, though her eyes were still red when Morton served the dish. The clock on the wall read exactly 8:45 p.m. when Calvin finished eating. Everything on schedule, everything as it should be, except nothing felt right now. He headed to his office, determined to review some contracts before bed. Work. There was always work to be done. That was how he kept his mind busy, how he avoided thinking about the gaps in his life, about the emptiness that surrounded him in a house too large for one man and his young daughter, who slept upstairs under the care of the nanny. Calvin sat at his desk, opened his laptop and stared at the screen without really seeing it. His fingers remained motionless on the keyboard. Marjorie Lane. The name floated in his mind, opening doors he had kept locked for years, doors to a past that didn't fit the man he had become. Almost without realizing it, Calvin stood up and walked to a bookshelf in the farthest corner of the office, behind a row of books on economics and management. There was a small wooden box he hadn't opened in a long time. His hands hesitated for a moment before reaching for it. Dust had accumulated on the lid, a silent witness to the time it had remained untouched. He took it to the desk and opened it slowly. Inside, there were only a few old photos and small objects that would have no value to anyone but him. A small plastic dinosaur, a perfectly round stone found by a lakeside, a faded blue hair ribbon. Calvin picked up one of the photos. In it, a thin boy of about 8 smiled shyly next to a woman with a kind expression. The boy was holding a science fair trophy. The woman, with blonde hair tied in a simple bun, had her hands on his shoulders, her face beaming with pride. The memory came with surprising clarity. "See, Calvin? I told you you could do it. First place at the science fair." Little Calvin looked at the trophy in his hands, still not quite believing it. "Dad didn't come to see," he said softly. Marjorie knelt to be at his level, her light eyes meeting his. "Your father has a lot of responsibilities at work, dear, but that doesn't make your achievement any less special. I'm so proud of you." Her gentle fingers adjusted the bow tie of his school uniform. "And we'll celebrate with blueberry pancakes for breakfast tomorrow. What do you think?" Calvin blinked, returning to the present. The memory of the pancakes was so vivid, he could almost smell the butter melting in the pan, hear the soft sizzle of the batter meeting the hot metal. He put the photo back in the box and picked up another. In this one, he was even younger, maybe 5. He was sitting in a kitchen chair, with Marjorie behind him, combing his dark hair. Calvin's face in the photo showed a relaxed, almost sleepy expression, while she hummed some lullaby. Without warning, the melody came back to him. A simple song about stars and dreams, sung in a soft voice that soothed his childhood fears. Marjorie sang to him every night, after telling him stories. Stories about brave knights and gentle dragons, about children who discovered magical worlds and came home transformed. Calvin closed his eyes, letting the memory swallow him. It was a stormy night. The thunder seemed to shake the whole house, and little Calvin was huddled under the covers, trembling. His parents were traveling, as they often were. The bedroom door opened, and Marjorie came in with a steaming mug of hot chocolate. "Are you scared, dear?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Calvin wanted to deny it, to say he was brave like the heroes in the stories, but another clap of thunder sounded, and he burrowed deeper. Marjorie placed the mug on the bedside table and began to stroke his hair. "Do you know what my mother used to tell me about thunder? That it's just the clouds talking to each other. They talk loudly because they're so far apart." "Is that true?" he asked, already less frightened. "Well, it's one way to look at it," she smiled. "Sometimes we need to find ways to make scary things less scary." She sang to him until he fell asleep, the thunder forgotten, the lullaby the only sound that mattered. Calvin opened his eyes, surprised to feel a lump in his throat. How could he have forgotten all of this? How had these memories become so distant, so hazy, when they now seemed so sharp and vital? The answer, he knew, was in the last photo he now held, a photo from his high school graduation. In it, a teenage Calvin, his face already resembling the man he would become, received his diploma. His parents were there, elegant but distant figures, and in the corner of the photo, almost hidden, was Marjorie. No longer as an official nanny. He was too old for that, but present nonetheless. It was the last day he saw her. University came next. Then internships, the first company, the meteoric success, the meticulous building of an empire, the equally meticulous creation of a man who needed no one. Calvin put the photos back in the box, but hesitated before closing it. At the bottom, there was a small card, yellowed with time. He picked it up, knowing exactly what was written on it, though he hadn't read it in decades. The handwriting was delicate but firm. "You are a good boy, Calvin. Never forget that. With love, Marjorie." It was a farewell note, left on the day he left for university, along with a watch he no longer wore. Calvin sat for a long time, the card between his fingers, thinking about all he had achieved and all he had lost along the way. The boy who smiled in the photos, who felt safe with lullabies and bedtime stories, had disappeared at some point. In his place was a man who measured success in numbers, who kept everyone at a distance, who had created an impeccable routine that left no room for the unexpected, for real connections. He looked at the clock, 11:10 p.m. Far past the time he would normally be asleep. Another routine broken in a single day. Calvin put the box back on the shelf, but placed the small card in his jacket pocket. Tomorrow he would talk to Aubrey. He would find out more about Marjorie, about her illness. As he walked to his room, Calvin realized something unsettling. At some point in his journey to become the man he was today, he had distanced himself from everything that had once given his life meaning, and maybe, just maybe, there was still time to find his way back. Calvin woke up at 6 a.m., as always. The morning ritual was a ballet of precise movements, timed to the second, 5 minutes of stretching, 20 minutes on the treadmill, 10 minutes in the shower. At 6:45 a.m., already impeccably dressed in a custom-made grey suit, he went down for breakfast. Ellie, his 5-year-old daughter, was already at the table, swinging her little legs that didn't reach the floor. Her blonde hair had been styled in 2 perfectly symmetrical braids by the nanny, and her blue eyes, identical to her father's, lit up when she saw him. "Good morning, Daddy," she exclaimed, with the enthusiasm only young children can muster so early. "Good morning, Ellie," Calvin replied, noticing the colorful drawing next to her plate. "What are you doing?" "It's a magic star. When you make a wish and put it under your pillow, it comes true." Calvin smiled slightly as he sat down. Martha, the housekeeper, served his usual black coffee and a plate of eggs with toast. Ellie chattered about her dream from the previous night, something about unicorns and floating castles. Typically, Calvin would just nod distractedly while checking messages on his phone. Today, however, he found himself actually listening to her. The memories unearthed the night before had subtly changed something within him, like a slightly misaligned gear in a precision watch. At 7:30 a.m., the nanny arrived to take Ellie to school. Calvin gave a quick kiss to the top of his daughter's head and headed to his home office, where he had video conferences scheduled for the entire morning. Business continued. The world kept spinning, regardless of personal revelations. The hours passed in meetings and analyses of financial reports. Calvin maintained his usual facade. The ruthless CEO, the shrewd investor, the man whose emotions never interfered with his decisions. But behind this well-constructed mask, a part of his mind remained occupied with thoughts of Marjorie Lane. At noon sharp, Morton knocked on the office door. "Your lunch is served, Mr. Marks." Calvin nodded, closed his laptop and went to the dining room. As expected, everything was impeccable. The table set with fine china, the silver cutlery polished to a shine, the napkin perfectly folded. The usual precision. He sat in his customary seat at the head of the table, which was far too long for a man who almost always ate alone. Morton served the appetizer, an arugula salad with pears and walnuts, and then discreetly withdrew. Calvin ate in silence, savoring the perfect combination of flavors. Aubrey was, indeed, a talented chef. Even with everything that must be happening in her personal life, her work remained flawless. He wondered if this ability to compartmentalize, to maintain professional excellence despite personal problems, was something they both shared. When Morton returned to clear the appetizer plate and serve the main course, a salmon fillet with an herb sauce and sautéed vegetables, Calvin asked, "Is Miss Lane in the kitchen today?" Morton seemed slightly surprised by the question. "Yes, sir. She arrived at her normal time this morning." Calvin nodded, offering no explanation. It was not his habit to discuss employees or ask about their routines. From Morton's look, this break in pattern was noteworthy. Lunch continued, each dish more perfect than the last. Dessert, a lemon meringue pie, was served at 12:45 p.m., exactly when it should be. The routine preserved, order maintained. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Calvin took the last spoonful of dessert and placed his napkin beside the empty plate. Instead of getting up immediately, as he always did, he remained seated. "I would like to speak with the chef today, Morton. Please ask her to come here when she's finished in the kitchen." "Certainly, sir." 15 minutes later, Aubrey appeared at the dining room door. She was composed again, her chef's uniform immaculate, her blonde hair tied in an orderly bun. Only a very keen observer would notice the faint dark circles under her light eyes, signs of a restless night. "Are you wanting to see me, Mr. Marks?" she asked, her voice professional, with no trace of the desperation from the previous night. Calvin gestured for her to sit in the chair to his right. Aubrey hesitated. Employees rarely sat at the table with him, but she complied. "Lunch was excellent, as always," Calvin said. "Thank you, sir." An uncomfortable silence hung between them. Aubrey seemed to be expecting a reprimand, despite the previous night's assurance that her job was safe. Calvin, for his part, found himself in unusual territory, a conversation that was not strictly professional. "How is your mother today?" he finally asked. Aubrey seemed surprised by the question, but replied, "A little better. The pain has eased with the new medication, but..." She hesitated. "The doctors say we need more detailed tests for a precise diagnosis." Calvin nodded, absorbing the information. "And these tests, they're expensive, I imagine." "Yes," Aubrey confirmed, her gaze lowered. "I'm saving up, but it will still take some time to get the necessary amount." Calvin drummed his fingers on the table, a rare gesture of restlessness. "Your mother, Marjorie. She took care of me when I was little." Aubrey looked up, surprise evident in her light eyes. "Are you really talking about my mother?" "Yes." Calvin met her gaze. "I need to see her." The surprise on Aubrey's face gave way to an expression that was hard to interpret, a mix of confusion and, perhaps, a touch of hope. "She lives with me, in Riverdale. It's a small apartment, nothing like..." She gestured vaguely, indicating the mansion around them. "That doesn't matter." Calvin stood up, resolute. "I have important meetings this afternoon that I can't postpone, but tomorrow I'm free after lunch." "You really want to come to our house?" Aubrey seemed incredulous. "Yes, and please, don't call me sir when we're talking about your mother. You can call me Calvin." It was a small but significant concession. In his meticulously hierarchical world, Calvin Marks rarely allowed such familiarity. "Tomorrow then," Aubrey said, still processing the situation. "She'll be surprised." Calvin nodded, ending the conversation. "You can return to your duties now, and Aubrey..." She stopped, turning to him. "Thank you for lunch." "It was truly excellent." A small smile appeared on her face, the first he had seen since the incident in the locker room. "You're welcome, Calvin." As she left, Calvin realized that, for the first time in years, he was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with business or acquisitions. Tomorrow he would see Marjorie again, after almost 3 decades. The thought left him simultaneously apprehensive and strangely light. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Calvin's black Bentley pulled up in front of an apartment building in the Riverdale neighborhood. The contrast could not have been more stark. The luxury car seemed out of place on this middle-class street, where children rode bicycles on uneven sidewalks and clotheslines with laundry decorated some balconies. Aubrey, sitting in the passenger seat, seemed nervous. Throughout the 40-minute drive, she had spoken little, only giving occasional directions. Calvin, for his part, had maintained his usual silence, though his mind was far from quiet. "This is it," Aubrey said as the car stopped. "3rd floor." Calvin looked at the building. It wasn't dilapidated, but it certainly showed signs of age, peeling paint in some spots. A sign indicating the elevator was out of order, simple but well-tended flowers at the entrance. It was the kind of place where people worked hard to maintain dignity on tight budgets. "I'm sorry we have to take the stairs," Aubrey commented as they entered the lobby. "The elevator breaks down often." "It's no problem," Calvin replied, following her up the stairs. On the 3rd floor, Aubrey stopped in front of door 302 and hesitated with the keys in her hand. I think I should warn you. My mother isn't at her best. She used to be so vibrant." Calvin nodded. "I understand." "And our apartment is..." "Aubrey," Calvin interrupted her gently, "I'm not here to judge where or how you live." She took a deep breath and unlocked the door. The apartment was small but impeccably clean and organized. A living room combined with an open kitchen, decorated with simple furniture and a few personal touches, plants in colorful pots, framed photographs, a knitted blanket on the sofa. It was a home, Calvin realized, not a magazine showpiece or a status symbol, but a place truly lived in. "Mom," Aubrey called, walking toward a short hallway. "I brought someone to see you." Calvin followed her to one of the bedroom doors. Aubrey went in first, and he heard her soft voice talking to someone. After a moment, she reappeared at the door. "You can come in," she said, her face a mix of nervousness and hope. The room was small, dominated by a single bed and an old dresser. The curtains were partially drawn, creating a cozy dimness, and there, propped up on pillows, was Marjorie Lane. Calvin felt the impact of immediate recognition, followed by the shock of the change. The woman he remembered, energetic, quick to smile, always in motion, was now visibly frail. Her face, and still beautiful but marked by time, was pale and drawn. Her hair, which he remembered as vibrant blonde, was grey and thin, pulled into a loose braid over her shoulder. Her body, under the light blanket, seemed smaller than it should be. But her eyes, those light eyes that had looked at him with such kindness in his childhood, were still the same. "Calvin." Her voice was just a shadow of what it had been, but the recognition was clear. "Is that really you?" He approached the bed, feeling an emotion he couldn't name growing in his chest. "Hello, Marjorie." She tried to sit up straighter, but a wave of pain crossed her face. Still, she forced a smile. "Look at you," she said, a touch of her old warmth in her voice. "All grown up and important. I always knew you'd go far." Calvin sat in the chair beside the bed, watching her closely. Despite the smile, he could see how she discreetly clutched her side, how her breathing was shallow to avoid movements that would cause more pain. "How are you, Marjorie?" "So the truth," her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, just a bit tired. Nothing a good rest won't fix." "Mom," Aubrey intervened, her tone gentle but firm. "Dr. Miller said you need to be honest about the pain." Marjorie sighed, a small surrender. "It's a little worse today, but I've had better days, and I will again." Calvin glanced at Aubrey, who bit her lower lip. "Oh, what is the doctor's diagnosis?" he asked. "They suspect a liver problem," Aubrey replied. "But we need more tests to confirm. In the meantime, she's on painkillers, but—" A soft moan from Marjorie interrupted the explanation. She closed her eyes for a moment, her forehead creased in an expression of pain she couldn't hide. "When was the last time she took her medication?" Calvin asked, his tone shifting to something more urgent. "4 hours ago," Aubrey answered, concern evident in her voice. "But we can't give her more now. The doctor was very clear about the intervals." Calvin observed Marjorie more closely. Her skin had a faint yellowish tint that he hadn't noticed initially. Her breathing was more labored, and small beads of sweat glistened on her forehead despite the cool room. Without a word, Calvin stood up and took off his jacket, placing it over the chair. "Marjorie," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I'm taking you to the hospital now." No, there's no need," she protested weakly. "It's just a bad day. I'll be better tomorrow." "She's right," Aubrey intervened, though her tone betrayed her worry. "The doctor said these fluctuations are normal and—" "This isn't a fluctuation," Calvin interrupted her. "Her skin tone is yellowish, her breathing is irregular, and she's trying to hide how much pain she's really in." Marjorie looked at him, surprised. "They're always so observant." "Mom," Aubrey stepped closer, truly noticing the signs Calvin had pointed out. "It's all right, dear." Marjorie tried to reassure her, but another spasm of pain made her close her eyes. Calvin hesitated no longer. With careful but decisive movements, he leaned over and slipped one arm under Marjorie's knees and the other behind her shoulders. "What are you doing?" Aubrey asked, alarmed. "She needs help now," Calvin replied, lifting Marjorie from the bed. She was frighteningly light in his arms, as if the illness had consumed not just her energy, but her very substance. "Calvin, this isn't necessary," Marjorie protested, though weakly, as he carried her out of the room. "Get a blanket," he instructed Aubrey, who quickly complied, rushing ahead of them to open the apartment door. The descent down the stairs was tense. Calvin focused on keeping Marjorie safe in his arms, Aubrey following behind with a hastily packed bag of documents and medications. Curious neighbors opened doors or stopped in the hallway to watch the unusual scene. A man in formal attire carrying an elderly woman wrapped in a blanket, followed by a young woman with an anguished expression. When they reached the car, Calvin gave quick instructions to Aubrey to fully recline the passenger seat. Carefully, he settled Marjorie in the seat. "So to which hospital?" he asked, starting the engine. "Riverside Memorial is the closest, but no. What's the best hospital in the city?" "North Shore University Hospital," Aubrey replied, hesitant, "but it's over 15 miles from here, and they probably won't take our insurance and—" "North Shore, then," Calvin decided, pulling the car away from the curb. The drive to the hospital was made in a tense silence, broken only by Aubrey's occasional directions and soft questions Calvin directed at Marjorie to ensure she remained conscious. "Do you still like to sing?" he asked at one point, his eyes alternating between the road and the rearview mirror, where he could see her reflection. Marjorie smiled faintly. "I haven't been singing much lately. You used to sing to me every night," Calvin said, almost to himself. "Lullabies, even when I was too old for them." "You were never too old for a lullaby, Calvin," she replied, her voice little more than a whisper. Upon arriving at the hospital, Calvin parked directly at the emergency entrance. Without hesitation, he got out of the car, lifted Marjorie into his arms again, and walked purposefully through the automatic doors, Aubrey close behind. The emergency reception was relatively calm that afternoon. A nurse looked up as they entered and immediately called for a team upon seeing Marjorie's condition. "What do we have here?" a young doctor asked, approaching with a gurney. "Possible liver issue," Calvin replied, as he carefully placed Marjorie on the gurney. "Severe abdominal pain, jaundice, weakness." The doctor gave Marjorie an assessing look. "How long have these symptoms been present?" "The pain started about 2 months ago," Aubrey answered, stepping forward with the folder of medical documents. "But it's gotten significantly worse in the last week." The doctor nodded, already wheeling the gurney inside. "We'll run some tests immediately. Are you family?" "I'm her daughter," said Aubrey. "And you, sir?" Calvin hesitated for only a second. "Family," he replied simply. As the medical team took Marjorie further into the hospital, Calvin and Aubrey were directed to the reception desk to fill out forms. It was then that the practical reality of the situation began to set in. "Her health insurance?" the receptionist asked. Aubrey nervously fumbled in her bag, looking for the insurance card. Calvin could see the growing anxiety on her face. "That won't be necessary," he intervened, placing his corporate credit card on the counter. "Any expenses will be covered by me, and I want to ensure Mrs. Lane receives the best treatment available." The receptionist looked from the card to Calvin, her expression changing as she recognized the name engraved on the black metal. "Yes, Mr. Marks, I'll inform the medical team immediately." Aubrey looked at Calvin, her light eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "Yes, I do," he replied simply. They were led to a private waiting room, more comfortable than the common area. A heavy silence settled between them, not exactly uncomfortable, but laden with unexpressed thoughts and complex emotions. Calvin sat upright, as always, but his fingers drummed lightly on the arm of the chair, a rare sign of agitation. Aubrey alternated between moments of tense stillness and small nervous movements, adjusting her bag, checking her phone, fixing her hair. "She's going to be okay," Calvin said finally, though there was no certainty in his voice. Aubrey nodded, her eyes fixed on the door through which the doctors would eventually appear. "She's strong." "Always has been, I know," Calvin agreed, remembering the woman who had single-handedly faced the responsibilities of caring not just for him, but for the entire household, while his parents traveled constantly. The silence returned, but less tense now. In the quiet of the waiting room, past and present seemed to collide. The boy Marjorie had cared for and the man who was now in a position to help her, the child Marjorie had occasionally mentioned, and the worried young woman sitting across from him. Nearly 2 hours passed before the doctor returned. His face was serious, but not grim, a balance Calvin recognized from his own business meetings when the news was mixed. "Ms. Lane," the doctor addressed Aubrey, "we've managed to stabilize your mother. She's responding well to the pain medication." "And the diagnosis?" Calvin asked. "Preliminary tests confirm a liver problem, as we suspected. There's a biliary obstruction that's causing most of the symptoms. We'll need to run more tests to determine the exact cause and the appropriate treatment." "Surgery?" Aubrey asked, her voice small. "It's a possibility, but we need to evaluate further before deciding. What I can say for sure is that your mother will need ongoing treatment for some time. We're going to admit her for observation and additional tests." Aubrey nodded, processing the information. The doctor continued, his tone now more hesitant. "Regarding the administrative matters, our team informed me that Mr. Marks will be covering the expenses, but I'd like to point out that we're talking about a potentially long and costly treatment." "That's not a problem," Calvin stated. "I want her to receive all the necessary care without financial limitations." The doctor seemed slightly relieved. "In that case, I'll request a private suite and ensure that Dr. Reeves, our hepatology specialist, takes over the case personally." "When can we see her?" Aubrey asked. "In about 30 minutes. She's being transferred to her room now and is still a bit sedated, but conscious." When the doctor left, Aubrey turned to Calvin, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she began. "You don't have to thank me," Calvin interrupted her gently. "Marjorie did a lot for me when I was a child, more than you can imagine. But the costs, it must be a fortune. I promise I'll find a way to pay you back, even if it takes years. I will pay for everything," Calvin cut in, his tone firm but gentle. "And you can stay with your mother for as long as needed. Your job is secure. But the kitchen, the meals, I can hire another chef temporarily." "That's not fair to you," Aubrey insisted. "What wouldn't be fair," Calvin replied, "is to let you face this alone when I have the resources to help." Aubrey opened her mouth to argue again, but something in Calvin's expression made her stop. There was a determination there that she was beginning to recognize, the same determination that had led him to carry Marjorie down the stairs without hesitation, the same one that had made him successful in a competitive world. "Thank you," she said finally, simply. Calvin just nodded. He was not a man accustomed to receiving gratitude. His employees feared him more than they admired him. His business associates respected him for his ruthless efficiency. This kind of genuine gratitude, for an act of simple humanity, was something new to him. Sitting there in the hospital waiting room, with Marjorie's future uncertain but at least in the best possible hands, thanks to his intervention, Calvin felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of doing something truly right, not just strategically correct or financially prudent, but morally right. It was a strangely comforting feeling. Like coming home after a long journey. 3 days had passed since Marjorie's admission. The doctors had confirmed the diagnosis, a treatable liver condition, but one that would require ongoing care. With the right treatment, the outlook was promising, though the road to full recovery would be long. Calvin visited the hospital daily, always at the same time, between his afternoon meetings and dinner. The routine, once sacred, now adapted to this new priority in his life. For the first time in years, work commitments took a back seat without him feeling that suffocating anxiety of losing control. That Friday, however, he arrived earlier, and he was not alone. "Daddy, where are we going?" Ellie asked, skipping beside him down the hospital corridor, her small hand held firmly in his. She wore a light blue dress with small embroidered flowers, and her blonde hair was tied in a ponytail with a ribbon the same color as the dress. "We're going to visit a very special person," Calvin replied, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and anticipation. He had never spoken of Marjorie to Ellie. In fact, he rarely spoke of his past to anyone. "Is it a surprise?" Ellie's blue eyes sparkled with the excitement only children can feel at the promise of something new. "Yes, in a way." Calvin smiled slightly. "So it's someone who took care of me when I was about your age. Like Miss Jennifer takes care of me. Ellie asked, referring to her nanny. Yes, something like that. The nurses smiled as they saw little Ellie, who greeted everyone with the ease of a natural diplomat. Calvin never ceased to be amazed by how easily his daughter connected with people, a skill he himself had lost somewhere on the path to adulthood. They stopped in front of room 307. Calvin took a deep breath before knocking gently. "Come in," came the reply, Marjorie's voice already sounding a bit stronger than in previous days. Calvin opened the door, guiding Ellie inside. The private room was spacious and well lit, with a large window overlooking the hospital garden. Vases of flowers, sent by Calvin, decorated the room, bringing color and life to the hospital space. The gentle scent of lilies and roses mixed with the characteristic antiseptic smell of hospitals, creating a more welcoming atmosphere. Marjorie was sitting up in bed, propped against pillows. Her appearance had improved significantly since her admission. Color had partially returned to her face, and her eyes seemed more alert. Her grey hair was combed into a loose braid, and she wore a navy blue robe over her hospital gown. When she saw Calvin with the little girl, her face lit up with a smile that erased years from her countenance. "You brought a visitor," she said, her voice soft but full of warmth. Calvin nodded, approaching the bed with Ellie. "Marjorie, this is my daughter, Ellie. Ellie, this is Mrs. Lane." Ellie looked at the lady in the bed with that fearless curiosity typical of children. Her eyes scanned from the IV tubes to the heart monitor beside the bed, then finally settled on Marjorie's gentle face. After a moment of observation, she smiled, revealing the gap where she had recently lost a baby tooth. "Hi, Mrs. Lane. Are you sick?" "My daddy said you're getting better." Marjorie laughed softly. "Yes, dear, I am sick, but the doctors are taking very good care of me, and you can call me Marjorie." Ellie moved closer to the bed, still holding her father's hand. "Daddy said you took care of him when he was little, like me." "That's right," Marjorie confirmed, her gaze shifting between Ellie and Calvin. "Your father was a very special boy." "He's still special," Ellie declared with the absolute certainty only a 5-year-old can possess. "He knows how to tell really good bedtime stories, and he makes the best hot chocolate in the whole world." Calvin felt an unexpected warmth rise up his neck. He wasn't used to being the subject of conversation, especially conversations about the softer aspects of his personality. The mention of hot chocolate caught him by surprise. It was a recipe he made instinctively, without ever wondering where he had learned it. "The hot chocolate," said Marjorie, her eyes twinkling with recognition, "with a little bit of cinnamon and vanilla." "Yes," exclaimed Ellie, excited. "How did you know?" "Because I taught your father that recipe. It's what I used to make for him when there were storms or when he couldn't sleep." Calvin felt as if something clicked in his brain, the sudden memory of rainy nights, a steaming mug, and the sense of security that came with it. How could he have forgotten that? "Ellie, why don't you get that chair and sit by the bed?" he suggested, trying to reorganize his thoughts. Ellie obeyed, dragging an armchair closer to Marjorie's bed with determination, despite the furniture being nearly her size. Calvin helped her with the last few inches, and then lifted her to sit down. "What was my daddy like when he was little?" Ellie asked bluntly, leaning forward slightly, clearly fascinated by the idea of her father ever having been a child. Marjorie smiled, glancing briefly at Calvin as if asking for permission. He nodded slightly, resigned but curiously expectant. "Well, your father was a very smart boy," Marjorie began, settling back against the pillows. "He loved books and always asked questions about everything. He was always trying to understand how things worked." "I like books too," exclaimed Ellie, excited by the similarity. "And questions." "Miss Jennifer says I ask too many questions sometimes." "There are never too many questions," Marjorie replied with a wink. "Your father once asked me why the sky was blue, and when I answered, he asked why light behaved that way, and then why atoms did that, and he kept going until we were both looking it up in an encyclopedia." "He was only 6. Calvin almost smiled at the memory. He had forgotten that specific episode, but he remembered the feeling of insatiable curiosity that had accompanied him throughout his childhood. "He was also very organized," Marjorie continued, a gleam of amusement in her eyes. "All his toys had specific places, and he would get very upset if anyone moved them." "He's still like that," Ellie exclaimed, laughing. Every morning, he fixes his tie the same way, and if someone moves anything in his office, he knows right away. Marjorie laughed, looking at Calvin with affection. Some things never change. And was he brave? Ellie asked. Marjorie looked directly at Calvin now, her gaze soft but penetrating, as if seeing past the facade of the successful businessman to the boy he had been. Very brave. Even when he was scared, he always faced things. Like what? Ellie insisted. Well, there was a huge tree in the backyard of the house where we lived. An old oak tree vine with branches that seemed to touch the clouds. Your father was afraid of heights, but he was determined to climb that tree. So, day after day, he would climb a little higher. It didn't matter if he slipped or got scared. The next day, there he was, trying again. Until, finally, he reached the top. Calvin remembered that tree, the feeling of vertigo mixed with exhilaration when he finally reached the highest branches. He had completely forgotten that small childhood achievement. And do you know what he did when he got to the top? Marjorie continued. Ellie shook her head, completely absorbed in the story. He built a small platform with boards and ropes. It was his secret place. He would take books up there and read for hours. Sometimes, I had to call him several times for dinner because he was so lost in the stories he didn't hear me. Like a tree castle? Ellie asked, her eyes wide. Exactly like a castle, Marjorie agreed, smiling. Your father was always very good at building things. Once, he assembled a telescope from a kit all by himself. He was only 8 and followed all those complicated instructions without any help. Calvin found himself leaning against the wall, watching the interaction with a strange feeling in his chest. He had forgotten about the telescope, about the night spent stargazing, learning the constellations. How could he have let so many memories slip away? Marjorie continued with other stories. The time Calvin had rescued a baby bird that had fallen from its nest and cared for it until it could fly. The Christmas he spent weeks secretly building a jewelry box for his mother. The time he insisted on making breakfast by himself and almost set the kitchen on fire trying to make pancakes. Pancakes are tricky, Calvin defended himself, speaking for the first time since the stories began. The griddle temperature has to be just right. Marjorie smiled at him. You learned eventually. In fact, by the time you were 10, you were making the best blueberry pancakes I've ever tasted. Can you make pancakes for me, Daddy? Ellie asked, her eyes pleading. On Sunday, Calvin promised, surprising himself with his own spontaneity. Marjorie told of the time Calvin decided he wanted to be an astronaut and spent a whole month wearing a makeshift astronaut helmet around the house, about the collection of colorful rocks he kept in a special box under his bed, about how he had a natural talent for chess and won his first school tournament at age 9. Simple, on sweet human stories. Stories that painted a portrait of a normal boy, with normal fears and dreams, so different from the image Calvin cultivated of himself now. It was as if she were reintroducing him to a version of himself he had left behind, or worse, deliberately buried. Ellie listened with growing fascination, occasionally interrupting with questions or enthusiastic comments. Her crystal-clear laugh filled the room whenever Marjorie told a particularly funny or mischievous story about her father. And with each story, the distance between the boy of yesteryear and the girl of today seemed to shrink, as if an invisible thread was being woven between generations. Calvin watched, feeling something inside him slowly transform. It was as if long-closed doors and windows were being opened, letting light into darkened rooms of his soul. After nearly an hour, a nurse came in to check Marjorie's vital signs. I think it's time for us to go, Calvin said, noticing signs of fatigue on the older woman's face, despite her evident pleasure in the visit. But I want to hear more stories, Ellie protested. We can come back another day, Calvin promised, surprised at how easily the promise left his lips. Ellie's eyes lit up. Can we come tomorrow? Tomorrow, Calvin agreed, exchanging a look with Marjorie, who nodded with a smile. See you tomorrow, Mrs. Marjorie, Ellie exclaimed, hopping off the armchair and waving. See you tomorrow, dear, Marjorie replied. As Ellie went to the door, she added softly, just for Calvin to hear, She's wonderful, Calvin, just like you were. She has your same curious and kind spirit. Calvin felt something tighten in his throat. Rest, Marjorie. We'll be back tomorrow. The next day, before they left for the hospital, Calvin found Ellie sitting at the kitchen table, concentrating on a sheet of paper. Colored pencils were scattered around her as her tongue poked out of the corner of her mouth, a sign of her intense concentration. "What are you doing?" he asked, approaching. "Type present for Grandma Marge," Ellie replied distractedly, without taking her eyes off the drawing. Calvin paused, surprised by the term. "Grandma Marge?" Ellie shrugged, as if it were obvious. "She took care of you like a mom, so it's like she's my grandma, right? Like your mom's mom would be my grandma." The childlike logic was simple and irrefutable. Calvin could find no argument against it. "Can I see?" Ellie held up the drawing with pride. It was a colorful depiction, as only children can create. A small figure in a blue dress, clearly Ellie, a larger figure in a grey suit, obviously him, and between them, a figure with grey hair and a big smile, Marjorie. Above them, a bright yellow sun shone, and colorful flowers were everywhere. At the top of the page, in large, uneven letters, was written, "For Grandma Marge." "It's beautiful, Ellie," Calvin said, genuinely touched. "Do you think she'll like it?" Ellie asked, a momentary insecurity showing in her voice. "I'm sure she'll love it," Ellie's smile returned, as radiant as the sun in her drawing. "I'm making one for Aubrey too. She looks sad sometimes, and drawings make people happy." Calvin smiled, touched by his daughter's natural empathy. How had he never noticed this quality in her before? Or maybe he had noticed, but had been too busy to truly appreciate it. When they arrived at the hospital, Marjorie was sitting in an armchair by the window rather than in bed. It was a small but significant sign of improvement. Aubrey was there too, arranging some personal items she had brought for her mother. "Grandma Marge," Ellie exclaimed, running to her with the carefully folded drawing in her hands. "I made you a present." Marjorie looked at Calvin in surprise, who just shrugged with a small smile. Her expression softened into understanding and something more, a deep emotion she only partially managed to contain. "For me? How wonderful," she said, extending her arms to receive the drawing that Ellie was now carefully unfolding. When she saw the picture and the words at the top, Marjorie was quiet for a moment, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Grandma Marge," she read softly, running her fingers over the letters. "It's because you took care of my daddy like a mom," Ellie explained seriously. "So it's like you're my grandma. Do you like it?" "Oh dear," Marjorie replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful present I've ever received." She opened her arms, and Ellie didn't hesitate to step in for a hug. Marjorie held her gently, looking over the girl's head at Calvin, who watched the scene with an expression he rarely allowed himself to show, vulnerable, open, emotional. "I'm going to hang it right here so everyone can see," Marjorie declared when the hug ended. With help from Ellie and Aubrey, she used a piece of tape the nurse brought to affix the drawing to the wall, right next to the armchair. "Look, Daddy, everyone will see it," Ellie exclaimed, proud. "It's perfect," Calvin replied, exchanging a meaningful look with Aubrey, who watched the scene with a mix of surprise and emotion. That night, after putting Ellie to bed, Calvin didn't go to his office as he normally would. Instead, he went up to the mansion's attic, a rarely visited space where objects from the past were stored in meticulously labeled boxes. Dust danced in the air as he turned on the light, reflecting in the golden beams that came through the small windows. The boxes were organized chronologically, a testament to his perfectionism that extended even to the parts of his life he preferred to ignore. He found what he was looking for in a box simply marked childhood, a photo album bound in brown leather, its pages yellowed with time, dusty from disuse. He took it to his room and sat in the armchair by the window. For several minutes, he just looked at the closed cover, as if afraid of what he would find inside. Finally, he took a deep breath and opened it. The first pages contained formal photos, baby Calvin in his mother's arms, who smiled stiffly for the camera, child Calvin at social events, always impeccably dressed, annual school portraits, showing his progression from boy to teenager. But in the middle of the album, the tone of the images changed. There were more candid photos, captured in moments of genuine joy or concentration. Calvin at the beach, building a sandcastle. Calvin asleep on the sofa, a book open on his chest. Calvin laughing as he ran through the garden with a paper boat in his hand, and then Calvin saw it. The photo he was looking for without knowing he was looking. Marjorie sitting in a rocking chair on the porch, with little him on her lap. She was laughing, her head thrown back in joyful abandon, while he, about 4 years old, was laughing too, his head resting against her chest. The sunset in the background bathed the scene in golden hues, creating an almost ethereal image of simple, pure happiness. Calvin felt something warm and wet run down his face and realized, with surprise, that he was crying. He couldn't remember the last time he had cried, certainly not since he became a CEO, maybe not even since adolescence. He ran his fingers over the image, as if he could touch that moment from the past, as if he could reach the boy he had been and tell him that everything would be okay, but that he shouldn't forget what really mattered. "How could I forget all this?" he whispered to the empty room, his voice choked with long suppressed emotion. The answer didn't come in words, but in a deep understanding that settled in his chest. He had forgotten because remembering hurt too much, because the memories of warmth and security made the coldness of his adult life almost unbearable, because at some point he had decided that success and emotion were mutually exclusive. He looked at another photo, him at 7 years old, proudly displaying a small science trophy. Marjorie was beside him, her arm around his shoulders, both smiling. His parents were not in the picture, probably on some business trip or at a social event, like so many times during his childhood. Calvin closed the album, but kept the rocking chair photo in his hands. Tomorrow he would take it to show Marjorie and Ellie. It was time to build a bridge between his past and his future. Time to allow the boy in the photo, curious, brave, capable of pure joy, to have a voice in his life again. Maybe it wasn't too late to rediscover parts of himself he had left behind. Maybe, through Ellie, through Marjorie, he could find a way back. 2 weeks had passed since Ellie's first visit to Marjorie. In that time, a gentle routine had been established. Every afternoon after school, Calvin would take his daughter to the hospital. While Ellie charmed the medical staff with her spontaneous nature, Calvin watched with growing admiration as his daughter formed a genuine bond with Marjorie. They colored together, shared stories, and sometimes Marjorie taught the girl songs from her own childhood. Marjorie's health was steadily improving. The doctors were optimistic, saying that with proper treatment, she could be discharged soon. Calvin had ensured that the best specialists cared for her and that no resources were spared. That Wednesday, the sky was particularly blue when Calvin arrived at the hospital alone. Ellie was at a birthday party for a school friend, so he decided to use the time to talk to the doctors about the next steps in Marjorie's treatment. When he reached room 307, he found Aubrey organizing some clothes into a small suitcase. Her dark circles revealed sleepless nights, divided between caring for her mother and working extra shifts at a local restaurant to supplement her income. Although Calvin had assured her that her job was safe, Aubrey had insisted on finding temporary work while she was away from the mansion. "Good afternoon," Calvin greeted, knocking lightly on the open door. Aubrey turned, her blonde hair tied in a messy bun. "Oh, hi, Calvin. Is Ellie not with you today?" "Birthday party," he explained. "How's Marjorie?" "Better every day. The doctor just left. He said she might be discharged next week if her latest tests remain good." Aubrey smiled, but there was a subtle tension in her light eyes. "That's excellent," Calvin replied. "Where is she now?" "Physical therapy. They're helping her regain strength in her legs after so much time in bed." Aubrey closed the suitcase and checked her watch. "I should get her in 20 minutes. "I can wait with you," Calvin offered, sitting in the armchair by the window. Aubrey nodded, continuing to organize small belongings scattered around the room. She had a nervous energy, a constant movement, as if stopping meant facing thoughts she preferred to avoid. "How are things at the apartment?" Calvin asked casually, watching her. The question seemed to catch Aubrey by surprise. She hesitated, folding and refolding a scarf unnecessarily. "Everything's fine," she answered vaguely. "I'm managing." Calvin didn't press. In recent days, He had noticed this hesitation whenever financial or domestic matters came up. Aubrey was proud, a trait he recognized well, as he shared the same characteristic. A silence fell between them, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant noise of hospital activities in the hallway. Aubrey continued her tidying, while Calvin feigned interest in the view from the window. "I'm going to get a coffee," Aubrey announced abruptly. "Do you want anything?" "I'm fine, thank you." She grabbed her purse, a simple, worn piece, and quickly left the room. In her haste, she didn't notice when a white envelope slipped out of the poorly closed bag, falling silently to the floor near the door. Calvin noticed the envelope immediately. His first instinct was to call out to Aubrey, but she had already disappeared down the hall. He stood up and walked to the door, picking up the envelope. It was unsealed, the sender's stamp visible in the upper corner. Riverdale Properties Management. Without really planning to, Calvin found himself sliding his fingers inside the envelope. An inner voice argued that it was an invasion of privacy, but another, stronger voice said that Aubrey needed help, even if she wouldn't admit it. The paper he pulled out confirmed his suspicions. It was an eviction notice, dated 3 days prior. The text was clear and impersonal. "This is the final notice regarding the 3-month delay in rent payment for the property located at 245 Maple Street, apartment 302. If the total amount of 4,750 hours, including late fees, is not paid in full within 10 days of this notification, we will be forced to begin eviction proceedings." Calvin felt a tightness in his chest. The deadline would be up in a week, just when Marjorie was due to be discharged. The idea of her returning home only to face an eviction was unbearable. Hearing footsteps in the hallway, Calvin quickly folded the paper, put it back in the envelope, and tucked it into the inner pocket of his jacket. When Aubrey returned with her coffee, he was once again sitting in the armchair, seemingly absorbed in his phone. "I'm going to get Mom now," she said, taking a quick sip of the hot drink. "I'll wait here," Calvin replied, keeping his voice casual. When Aubrey left, he removed the envelope from his jacket, looking at it thoughtfully. It wasn't just the eviction, there were also the medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover, the loss of income during Marjorie's illness, the expensive medications for ongoing treatment. Calvin knew the ripple effect of financial problems all too well. He put the envelope away again, his mind already formulating a plan. Discreetly, he made a few calls while he waited. His personal assistant received precise instructions, which she noted without question. Years of working with Calvin had taught her that behind his seemingly impulsive decisions, there was always solid reasoning. When Marjorie returned to the room, pushed in a wheelchair by Aubrey, Calvin put his phone away and smiled. The older woman looked tired, but her eyes shone with a growing vitality. "Calvin, so good to see you," she greeted, as Aubrey helped her settle into bed. "Where's my little Ellie today?" "Birthday party. She asked me to tell you she misses you and that she'll bring something special for you tomorrow." Marjorie smiled. "That girl. She reminds me so much of you at that age, always thinking of others." Calvin felt a warmth in his chest. It was strange and comforting how Marjorie could see qualities in him that he himself had forgotten he possessed. The visit continued quietly. Calvin remained attentive to the conversation, but part of his mind was working on the details of what he needed to do. At one point, when Aubrey stepped out to speak with the nurse about the evening medication, Calvin took the opportunity to ask Marjorie, "Do you have someone who could help at home when you're discharged?" Marjorie hesitated. "Aubrey says she'll manage. She's always been like that, taking on too many responsibilities." "I think she learned that from me. Are you sure the apartment is suitable for your recovery? Stairs, an adapted bathroom." "Oh, our apartment is small, but cozy. Aubrey has already rearranged everything for when I get back." Marjorie smiled, but there was a shadow of worry in her eyes that didn't escape Calvin. "She didn't tell you about the..." The door opened and Aubrey returned. Marjorie's unfinished sentence hung in the air, but Calvin understood what she was about to say. Marjorie knew about the eviction. The rest of the visit passed without incident. Calvin said his goodbyes, promising to return the next day with Ellie. While driving home, he made a few more calls, confirming the arrangements his assistant had initiated. Everything would be ready in time. In the following days, Calvin maintained his routine of visits, always alert for any mention of financial problems or the apartment. Aubrey seemed increasingly tense as the discharge date approached, but she kept a brave smile on her face in front of her mother. On the eve of the hospital discharge, Calvin arrived earlier than usual. He found Aubrey alone in the room, organizing the last of Marjorie's belongings for her departure the next day. "Where's Marjorie?" he asked. "It's our last blood test," Aubrey replied, meticulously folding a sweater. "Calvin, She paused, biting her lower lip. "Yes?" "Nothing, just thank you for everything you've done. You didn't have to." Calvin nodded, sensing there was more to those words than Aubrey was expressing. Perhaps a veiled request for help that her pride wouldn't allow her to voice. "Say it's not an obligation, Aubrey. It's what people do for each other." A tear escaped, rolling down Aubrey's face. She wiped it away quickly. "Yeah, well, some people are more able to help than others." Calvin moved closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Tomorrow is a new beginning for Marjorie. Focus on that." Aubrey nodded, regaining her composure. "Yes, you're right. One problem at a time." The day of the discharge dawned sunny, as if the sky itself were celebrating Marjorie's recovery. Calvin arrived at the hospital driving personally, without a chauffeur, so there would be enough space for everyone in the car. Ellie was especially excited, carrying a small bouquet of flowers she had picked out herself. "Is Grandma Marge going to live at our house?" she asked as they rode the elevator. "No, sweetie. She has her own house, but we can visit her whenever we want." When they reached the room, they found Marjorie already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed. She wore a simple light blue dress and a light sweater. Her grey hair was tied in a simple bun, and there was a faint blush on her cheeks, promising signs of returning health. "Look at you," Calvin exclaimed. "Ready to dance your way out of here?" Marjorie laughed. "Maybe not dancing just yet, but certainly walking on my own 2 feet." She stood up slowly to demonstrate, leaning lightly on a cane. "Grandma Marge," Ellie ran to hug her gently. "I brought flowers for your house. They're beautiful, my love. They'll look perfect on the living room table." Aubrey entered, carrying the small suitcase with her mother's belongings. Her face was tense, though she tried to hide it with a smile. The discharge procedures were quick. Calvin had ensured all the paperwork was handled in advance. Soon they were in the car, Marjorie in the front seat for more comfort, Aubrey and Ellie in the back. "Are you excited to go home?" Calvin asked as he drove. "Very," Marjorie replied, looking out the window with visible pleasure. "Hospitals are necessary, but there's nothing like your own home." Calvin noticed Aubrey's worried face in the rearview mirror. She knew what awaited them, or at least what she thought awaited them. When they finally reached the apartment building in Riverdale, Calvin parked and helped Marjorie out of the car. Ellie jumped out excitedly, carrying the flowers and insisting on being the one to open the door for Grandma Marge. "Let's take the elevator," Calvin suggested. "But it's been broken for—" Aubrey started, then stopped, noticing the small sign on the elevator door, "Repaired and in working order." She looked at Calvin, who just shrugged with a small smile. They rode up silently to the 3rd floor. In the hallway, Aubrey hesitated before inserting the key into the lock of apartment 302. Her hand trembled slightly. "It's okay, dear," Marjorie said softly, assuming her daughter's nervousness was due to her health condition. "I'll be fine." Aubrey took a deep breath and opened the door. The scent was the first thing they noticed, a fresh aroma of flowers and newly baked bread. The apartment, already organized by Aubrey's meticulous care, now seemed transformed. There were vases with floral arrangements strategically placed. The small living room had new furniture, a more comfortable sofa, colorful pillows, a soft rug. The open kitchen gleamed with new appliances, and the refrigerator, visible from the entrance, was clearly stocked. "What?" Aubrey was speechless, looking around in shock. Marjorie entered slowly, leaning on her cane, her eyes wide. "What happened here?" Ellie ran inside, exploring the space with exclamations of delight. "Look, Grandma Marge, there are flowers everywhere." Calvin remained at the entrance, observing their reactions. There was a deep satisfaction in seeing the surprise on their faces, not for the material value of what he had done, but for the meaning of the gesture. Aubrey walked to the coffee table, where a white envelope caught her eye. She looked at Calvin, who nodded almost imperceptibly. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers and read the note aloud. "Everything is paid for. You are safe." Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Calvin again. "You didn't have to," she began. "Yes, I did," he replied simply. Marjorie, who had understood the extent of the gesture, walked slowly to Calvin. Her light eyes shone with unshed tears. "You were always a good boy, Calvin," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Even when life got hard, even when you had to be too strong, too soon. You never lost that." She raised her hand, lightly touching his face, a gesture so familiar from his childhood that Calvin felt something break inside him. "You reminded me of who I was," Marjorie continued. "Thank you for coming back." Calvin couldn't respond with words. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in decades. He wrapped Marjorie in a hug. Not the formal, quick hug of adults at social gatherings, but the sincere embrace of someone coming home after a long journey. Ellie, sensing the special moment, approached quietly and wrapped her small arms around them both, creating a perfect circle. Aubrey watched the scene, tears streaming freely down her face, until Calvin extended an arm, inviting her to join them. The hug of the four sas in the middle of the sunny living room needed no words. It was the universal language of belonging, of people finding and reconnecting, of circles closing and new ones beginning. When they finally separated, there was something new in Calvin's eyes, a clarity, as if he had found a part of himself he had been searching for a long time without knowing it. "Well," he said, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion, "I think you two need to get settled. Ellie and I will be back tomorrow for lunch, if that's okay." "More than okay," replied Marjorie, holding his hand. "It's perfect." As he left with Ellie, Calvin looked one last time at the transformed apartment, but the real transformation, he knew, had happened inside him. The forgotten envelope had revealed more than a financial problem. It had revealed an opportunity to rediscover the capacity to care, to act out of compassion, to be the good boy Marjorie had always seen in him again. And that, Calvin realized, was a much greater gift than anything he could have given them. A month had passed since Marjorie's discharge. Autumn had arrived, painting the trees in shades of red and gold. In Calvin Marks's mansion, however, something more important had changed, the very rhythm of the house. It was Saturday morning when the black Bentley parked at the entrance of the Riverdale building. Calvin and Ellie got out of the car, the girl skipping excitedly beside her father. They carried shopping bags, filled with select ingredients from a morning visit to the market. "Do you think Grandma Marge will like the special flour we bought?" Ellie asked as they rode the elevator. "I'm sure she will," Calvin replied, adjusting the bags. When they knocked on the door of apartment 302, they were greeted by the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of laughter. Aubrey opened the door, wearing a floral apron. Her blonde hair was in a ponytail, and there was a smudge of flour on her cheek. "Right on time," she said, smiling. "Mom was just telling the stories of the disastrous cookies you tried to make when you were 7. Calvin feigned indignation. "They weren't disastrous. They were experimental. You put pepper in them instead of cinnamon." Marjorie's amused voice came from the kitchen. Ellie giggled, running inside. "Daddy put pepper in the cookies." The kitchen, small but cozy after the renovations Calvin had arranged, was in a state of organized chaos. On the counter, flour was scattered, along with bowls of sugar and butter, and metal cookie cutters awaited. Marjorie, sitting on a tall stool adapted for her, smiled broadly. It was a culinary experiment far ahead of its time, Calvin defended himself. Nowadays, chocolate with chili is considered sophisticated. "But not Christmas cookies," Marjorie retorted, winking at Ellie. "Your father was always very confident, even when he was completely wrong." Instead of feeling uncomfortable with the teasing, Calvin smiled. It was this kind of shared memory, of casual intimacy built over time, that he had forgotten. "Let's show him how it's really done," Marjorie said to Ellie, holding out her hand to the girl. Come on, dear. This cookie recipe has been a Lane family secret for 3 generations. Ellie climbed onto a stool next to Marjorie, her eyes shining with anticipation. Calvin and Aubrey exchanged knowing glances as they unloaded the groceries. The first rule for perfect cookies, Marjorie began in a solemn tone, is clean hands and happy hearts. Ellie nodded seriously, as if receiving the most important of lessons. While Marjorie guided Ellie's small hands to measure flour and sugar, Calvin made coffee for the adults. It was a scene he would have never imagined months ago. Hikar, the billionaire CEO, now comfortable in this small apartment, doing something as mundane as making coffee. "Daddy, look, I'm creaming the butter," Ellie exclaimed, her hands covered in the yellow substance. "I see, Princess, very good. The butter needs to be soft, but not melted," Marjorie explained. "It's one of the secrets to the perfect texture." Aubrey began to prepare lunch, moving with the grace of a dancer around the small kitchen. There was a lightness to her that Calvin hadn't seen before. The weight of the world, the financial worries, the fear of losing her mother, the uncertainty about the future, had considerably lessened from her shoulders. "I need help with these vegetables, Mr. CEO," Aubrey joked, pushing a cutting board and some vegetables toward Calvin. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for this role," he replied, rolling up his shirt sleeves. "I'll teach you," Aubrey offered, demonstrating how to cut a carrot into perfectly uniform cubes. Soon, the 4 of them were working in harmony in the small kitchen. Marjorie and Ellie creating shapes with the cookie dough, Aubrey preparing a stew, and Calvin, surprisingly, following instructions without question. It was a coordinated dance, as if they had done this together for years. The conversation flowed naturally, jumping from topic to topic. Calvin found himself actively participating, offering opinions, asking questions, laughing openly. When was the last time he had talked like this, without an agenda, without a specific goal, just for the pleasure of human connection? "Remember that Christmas when you were 10? Marjorie asked, as she helped Ellie put the first batch of cookies in the oven. "You insisted on making cookies for all the household staff." Calvin stopped chopping vegetables, the memory returning. "We made how many? 100 cookies." 122, Marjorie corrected, laughing. "We started at 9 in the morning and only finished at 7 at night. Your parents came home from a trip and found the kitchen completely covered in flour. They weren't too happy," Calvin recalled. "Not at first," Marjorie agreed. "But when you explained that you wanted everyone to have a personal gift from you, well, even your father smiled." Calvin absorbed this information, a new piece of his childhood puzzle that he had forgotten. "I don't remember that part." "Of course you don't. You only remember the criticisms, not the moments of approval," Marjorie observed softly. "You were always like that." The comment struck Calvin like a revelation. It was true. His memory had selectively preserved the moments of failure, of criticism, of isolation. The moments of connection had been lost along the way. Until now. After lunch, which was eaten amidst laughter and conversation at the small dining table, Ellie asked to draw. Aubrey provided paper and colored pencils, and soon the girl was absorbed in her creation, her tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. Marjorie had retired for a brief rest in her room, while Aubrey washed the dishes, gently refusing Calvin's help. "Go relax for a bit," she insisted. "You look tired." Calvin wasn't tired. On the contrary, he felt more alive than he had in a long time. But he accepted the suggestion, knowing Aubrey valued this moment of caring for the space she could now call home without fear. He sat on the small sofa, watching Ellie draw. The apartment was modest compared to his mansion, but there was something here that the grand house had never had, a sense of home. The sounds of Aubrey in the kitchen, the soft breathing of Marjorie resting in her room, the scratching of Ellie's pencil on paper, it all combined into a symphony of domestic life he had forgotten existed. "I'm done," Ellie finally announced, holding up her drawing with pride. Calvin looked at the colorful picture, 4 figures holding hands in front of a house. Him, Ellie, Marjorie, and Aubrey all smiling under a big yellow sun. "It's beautiful, Ellie," he praised sincerely. The girl came closer, sitting next to him on the sofa. She looked at her drawing, then at her father, her blue eyes serious and questioning. "Daddy," she began, her voice small but determined, "are we a family now?" The question took Calvin by surprise, not because of the question itself, but because of the clarity with which the answer came to him, without hesitation. "Yes," he replied, putting his arm around her shoulders. "We are." Ellie smiled, satisfied, and turned her attention back to the drawing, adding more flowers around the figures. Calvin sat there, feeling the small weight of his daughter against his side, the profound simplicity of that moment etching itself into his memory. The following afternoon, back at the mansion, Calvin sat in the garden. It was a space meticulously planned and maintained by a team of gardeners, with perfectly manicured lawns and geometrically arranged flower beds. Beautiful, but lacking the wild joy of a truly lived-in garden. He had invited Marjorie and Aubrey to spend Sunday with them. Initially, Aubrey had hesitated, clearly intimidated by the grandeur of the house, but Ellie had insisted so much that she eventually gave in. Now, from his place on the veranda, Calvin watched Marjorie and Ellie sitting on a bench under an apple tree. The older woman was teaching the girl how to make flower crowns from daisies picked from the garden. Ellie's laughter sounded like music in the afternoon air. Aubrey came out of the house, carrying a tray with lemonade and cookies, the same ones they had made the day before. She smiled when she saw her mother and the girl, then noticed Calvin watching the scene. "They get along well, don't they?" she commented, placing the tray on the table next to him. "Yes," Calvin replied. "It's as if they've always known each other." Aubrey sat in the chair next to him, her gaze following his to the scene under the apple tree. "Ellie needs this, you know. Someone like that in her life." "I know." Calvin paused. "I needed it too." The comment hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Aubrey didn't respond immediately, respecting his moment of reflection. "I spent my life trying to be big," Calvin said finally, almost to himself, "building companies, accumulating power, growing in every visible direction, and I almost forgot to be whole." On the garden table, the photo album was open. He had brought it to show Marjorie and Ellie later. The exposed page showed Calvin at 12, sitting at the piano with Marjorie by his side. Both were smiling for the camera, a moment of shared joy frozen in time. "It's not too late," Aubrey observed softly, her light eyes meeting his. "To be whole." Calvin nodded, feeling a certainty grow within him. "No, it's not." At that moment, as the afternoon sun cast a golden light over the garden, Calvin made a silent promise to himself. He would never again stray from what truly mattered. The success, the achievements, the empire he had built, all of it only had value if there was someone to share it with. A week later, something unprecedented happened at the Marks mansion. The staff had been dismissed for the day, except for Morton, who had received specific instructions to only supervise discreetly, without interfering. In the large main kitchen, normally the exclusive territory of hired chefs, Calvin Marks, billionaire CEO and a feared figure in the business world, was preparing lunch. He wore casual pants and a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, an apron protecting his clothes. "The onion needs to be translucent, not golden," Aubrey guided, watching as he stirred the pan with focused attention. "Like this?" he asked, revealing an insecurity rarely seen in other contexts. "Perfect," she approved. "So now we can add the tomato." At the kitchen table, Ellie and Marjorie prepared the salad together, the girl proudly responsible for tearing the lettuce leaves while Marjorie cut cherry tomatoes in half. The kitchen, once a functional and impersonal space, was overflowing with life. Music played softly in the background, an eclectic playlist mixing Ellie's favorite children's songs with classics Marjorie loved. The aroma of tomato sauce and fresh herbs filled the air, mingling with the sound of conversation and laughter. "And who would have thought," Marjorie commented, watching Calvin cook under Aubrey's patient guidance, "that the boy who almost set the kitchen on fire with pancakes would be preparing a full Italian lunch one day." "Technically," Calvin replied, "I could still set this kitchen on fire." "The day isn't over." Everyone laughed, the lightness of the joke revealing how much Calvin had changed. Once so rigid and controlled, He was now able to laugh at himself, to allow himself to be imperfect. When lunch was ready, spaghetti with homemade sauce, fresh salad and still warm bread that Aubrey had prepared earlier, they gathered not in the formal dining room, but at the small breakfast nook adjacent to the kitchen. It was a more intimate space, normally used only by the staff, but today it seemed the perfect place for this special meal. There was none of the elegant service Calvin was used to. They served themselves, passed the salad, cut the bread. There was a simple beauty in these everyday gestures, an intimacy that no high-class service could provide. During the meal, the conversation flowed naturally. Ellie talked about her school project. Aubrey mentioned a new restaurant she wanted to visit. Marjorie shared memories of her own mother. In a moment of comfortable silence, Calvin reached across the table, gently taking Marjorie's hand. The older woman looked at him, surprised by the public gesture of affection, so rare for the man he had been. "Thank you for reminding me of who I was," Calvin said, his voice low but firm. Marjorie's eyes shone with restrained emotion. "You just needed a mirror and time," she replied, gently squeezing his hand. Ellie, watching the scene, laughed joyfully, as if she had just witnessed something wonderful that only children can truly appreciate in its simplicity. Aubrey smiled, her light eyes reflecting a peace that had been so hard to find for so long. In that moment, sitting around a simple table, sharing a meal prepared with care, they were exactly what Ellie had asked. A family, not defined by blood or legal papers, but by choice, by connection, by love. Calvin's house, once a cold and silent space despite all its luxury, now pulsed with life. The boy Marjorie had known, who had gotten lost on the way to adulthood, had finally found his way back, not to childhood, but to the ability to feel fully, to connect genuinely, to value what truly mattered. Family restored, not the one he was born into, but the one he had chosen. The one that had chosen him. Gratitude alive, for second chances, for unexpected encounters, for remembering and relearning. Love, present, not as an abstract concept, but as a daily practice, as a constant choice, as the air they breathed together in this new life they had built. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.